The morning of her 20-week ultrasound, Anise woke up with a feeling she couldn't name. Not nausea. She'd learned what that felt like by week 6, the particular sourness that rose in her throat every time she smelled coffee. This was something else. A low, hollow pressure behind her sternum, like a door she'd forgotten to lock. She pressed her palm flat against her stomach and lay there for a moment, listening to the apartment. Quiet. The kind of quiet that felt intentional. Tobias had left before she woke up. She could tell by the way the sheets on his side were pulled too neat, tugged into place, the pillow flipped. He always did that when he left early. Straightened his side like he was erasing himself. She used to find it endearing. She used to think it meant he was considerate. She got dressed slowly, ate half a piece of toast, and drove herself to the clinic alone. That part didn't bother her at the time. She told herself she was used to it. Tobias worked in commercial real estate, and his schedule was, as he had explained to her many times in many different ways, unpredictable. Clients called, deals moved, she understood. She had always understood. The technician's name was June. She was warm and brisk, and she squeezed cold gel onto Anise's stomach without ceremony and pressed the wand down, and suddenly there he was on the screen. A small curved shape, heart flickering, fist tucked under his chin. Beautiful, June said. Everything looks perfect. Anise stared at the monitor and felt something break open in her chest. Not in a painful way. In the way of a window finally opened after a long winter. She was going to be someone's mother. She was going to be responsible for that small fist, those flickering chambers, that curled and perfect spine. June printed the images and handed them to her, and Anise sat up slowly, photos in both hands, and looked at them for a long time in the parking lot before she started the car. She had met Tobias at a fundraiser for a children's hospital. She had been there representing her firm. She was a senior architect, the youngest in her company to make the title, a fact she was proud of in a quiet, private way she rarely spoke about. He had been there with a client. He'd introduced himself by handing her a glass of water she hadn't asked for and saying, "You look like you've been standing too long." She had laughed. She hadn't meant to, but she did. They dated for a year, were engaged for 8 months, married on a Saturday in October, when the leaves were just starting to turn, at a venue Anise had found and booked and decorated largely herself because Tobias said he trusted her taste, and she told herself that was a compliment. Her parents adored him. Her mother, Diane, warm, practical, the kind of woman who judged character by how a person treated waitstaff, said Tobias had good energy. Her father, George, said less, but shook Tobias's hand with both of his at the wedding, which meant something. Anise had believed she was lucky. She told Tobias about the pregnancy on a Tuesday evening. She'd set the ultrasound photo on his dinner plate under a folded napkin, a small gesture she'd spent 3 days planning. He lifted the napkin, looked at the image, and was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled. "Wow," he said. "Not we're going to be parents. Not I can't believe it. Just, wow." Like he'd seen a magic trick. She told herself it was surprise, that men process things differently, that the joy would come. And it did sometimes. He'd put his hand on her stomach in bed, half asleep, and she'd feel him shift toward her. He bought a book on infant sleep schedules and left it on his nightstand. He talked about the nursery like it was a project he was genuinely interested in, which, for Tobias, was how love tended to look. So she stopped worrying. She let herself be happy. She went to prenatal yoga on Thursday evenings and came home flushed and calm, and told him about the other women in the class, and he listened, mostly. At 22 weeks, she started feeling flutters. Real ones, not imagined. She called her mother and cried a little, and her mother said, "Oh, honey, just wait," as if the feeling would keep getting better. As if everything that was coming was something to lean into. She had no reason to think otherwise. The day everything changed, she was 31 weeks pregnant. It was a Thursday. She had a follow-up ultrasound scheduled at Mercy General for a minor concern the midwife wanted to monitor. Nothing serious, the midwife had said, just routine. Tobias knew about the appointment. She had texted him that morning, "Ultrasound at 2. Wish me luck." He had replied, "You've got this. Text me after." She wore a blue blouse she liked, one that still buttoned around her stomach. She left work at noon. She drove to Mercy General feeling fine, light even, the way she often felt now when she was about to hear the heartbeat. It had become the part of pregnancy she loved most. That sound, proof of something continuing, something holding. She was walking through the main entrance when she saw him. She almost didn't register it at first. Her brain refused to process what her eyes were taking in. Tobias was on the far side of the lobby, near the patient check-in desk, in the charcoal blazer she'd hung up for him last weekend. He had his hand on the lower back of a woman in a white dress, a maternity dress, ruched at the sides, her stomach round and low, the way Anise's own stomach had started to look. He was leaning toward the woman, speaking close to her ear. The woman nodded, and he placed his free hand on her stomach, slow and deliberate. The ultrasound images from week 20 were still on Anise's phone. She had looked at them that morning. She didn't move. She stood in the hospital lobby with her bag on her shoulder and her coat open, and she simply stood there while the sound of the place, the intercom, the footsteps, the distant elevator chime, seemed to move further and further away. Someone walked past her. She didn't turn her head. He hadn't seen her. He was still bent toward the woman, still talking, and she could see his profile. And she recognized the particular way his mouth moved when he was being reassuring, that practiced calm he deployed in negotiations. And she understood, in the way you understand something you have known for a long time without admitting it, that he had been here before, that this was not the first appointment. Her hand went to her stomach. She pressed it there, hard, and the baby moved. A kick, a small and oblivious and perfect kick, and that was the thing that finally moved her feet. She turned and walked back out through the automatic doors and stood in the cold November air and breathed. She did not cry in the parking lot. She did not call anyone. She sat in her car with the heat off and looked at the steering wheel and thought about the fact that her appointment was in 14 minutes, and she needed to go back in there, and she could not go back in there and look at that lobby. She called the midwife's office and rescheduled. Said she'd had a work emergency. Her voice was steady. She was proud of her voice. She drove home, changed out of the blue blouse, lay on the bed with her coat still half on, and stared at the ceiling. Tobias came home at 7. She heard the key in the lock, heard him set his bag down in the hall, heard him say, "Hey, how'd the appointment go?" from the kitchen. She came and stood in the doorway. "Fine," she said. He looked at her then. Really looked. And something moved in his face, fast, controlled, and she knew that he knew. Not that she'd seen him, but that she knew. The way you can feel sometimes when a room has been searched. "I rescheduled," she said. "I wasn't feeling well." "Okay," he said. "Are you all right? I'm going to sleep." She didn't sleep. She lay in the dark next to him and felt his breathing shift into something slow and regular, and thought about the woman in the white dress. Thought about his hand on her stomach. Thought about the way he had leaned in close. In the morning, she called her friend Bethany from work, not to tell her not yet, just to hear a voice she trusted, and said she needed a recommendation for a family attorney. Bethany, who did not ask questions when it mattered, sent her 3 names by noon. She did not confront Tobias. Not yet. She moved carefully through the following week, sleeping next to him, eating dinner across from him, answering when he spoke to her. She was waiting. She didn't know for what exactly. Evidence of something. Certainty she hadn't yet earned. The permission to blow up her own life. It came on a Sunday. She had borrowed his phone to check the weather. Hers was charging across the room, and when she opened it, a message was already visible on the screen. From a contact saved simply as K. The message read, she said 34 weeks, so nervous. "You'll be there, right?" And below that, his reply, sent at 11:47 the previous night while Anise had been asleep 3 feet away. "I'll be there. I won't leave you." Anise put the phone down on the counter. She stood there for a moment looking at it. Then she picked it up and forwarded the thread to her own number. She called the attorney that afternoon. She made an appointment for Tuesday. She did not tell Tobias. She went about the rest of Sunday with a quietness inside her that she had never felt before. Not peace exactly, but the thing just past panic. When you've fallen so far, you stop bracing. She told her mother on Monday evening. She had driven to her parents' house. The house she grew up in, the one on Sycamore with the green shutters, and sat at the kitchen table while her mother made tea neither of them would drink. Her father stayed in the doorway, arms folded, and she watched his face go still. "How long?" her mother said. "It wasn't a question, I don't know. The woman is 34 weeks. The kitchen was very quiet. "You're not going back," her father said. Also not a question. "No," Anise said. Her mother set down the mug she was holding, came around the table and put both arms around Anise from behind, her chin on the top of Anise's head, the way she had done when Anise was small and sick with fever. Anise felt her throat close. "You're going to be okay," her mother said, not to comfort, as statement of fact. She stayed the night, slept in her childhood bedroom under a quilt her grandmother had made. The baby kicked twice in the night, and she pressed her hand down each time and said, quietly into the dark, I know, I've got you." The attorney's name was Constance Webb. Sharp, efficient, the kind of woman who had heard every version of this story and was not surprised by any of it. She walked Anise through her options with a matter-of-factness that was somehow the most comforting thing anyone had said to her all week. "You're in a strong position," Constance said. "Document everything. Don't remove yourself from the marital home yet. And don't confront him until we've filed." Anise did not confront him. She moved through 2 more weeks of their life together like a person finishing out a lease. Present, functional, inwardly already elsewhere. She documented. She photographed. She kept the forwarded messages on a locked folder on her phone and backed them up to the cloud, and did not look at them more than once because once was enough. Tobias, in those weeks, was attentive in a way that made her stomach turn. He brought home dinner twice, asked about the nursery colors, rubbed her feet on a Friday evening and said he was glad they were doing this together. She said, "Me too," and kept her face arranged and looked at the window behind him. The night she finally said something, it wasn't planned. She had come home late from a meeting and found him on the phone in the kitchen, speaking low, and she heard him say, I know, just rest." Before he registered, she was there and said goodbye too quickly and set the phone face down on the counter. She looked at the phone. Then she looked at him. "Who's Kay?" she said. The silence that followed was the answer. She had known it would be. He started with "It's not what you think," which she had expected. Then "It happened before us," which was a lie she let pass. Then "She doesn't mean anything," and that was the one that made her laugh, a short, flat sound she hadn't intended. "She's 34 weeks pregnant," Anise said. "And you told her you wouldn't leave her." He said her name then. Anise. Like it was something he could hold. "Don't," she said. She slept in the guest room. In the morning, she called Constance and said they were ready to file. She moved in with her parents for the last 6 weeks of her pregnancy. Her mother set up the old guest room with fresh sheets and a nightlight and a small basket of things: lotion, ginger candy, a novel Anise had mentioned wanting to read, and said nothing about any of it. Her father built the crib. He drove to the store and bought it in pieces, and spread everything out in the living room on a Saturday morning, and spent 4 hours putting it together with the manual spread across his knees, wearing his reading glasses and swearing quietly when pieces didn't fit. Anise sat on the couch and watched and felt something in her chest ease slowly, like a fist unclenching. She worked remotely for most of those weeks. Her firm was accommodating in the way firms are when they can afford to be, and when they value you enough not to lose you. Her manager, a dry-humored woman named Rachel, told her to take all the time she needed and then sent her a project she'd been wanting for 2 years, which was Rachel's version of care. She didn't think about Tobias much. That surprised her. She had expected grief that felt like grief, the sleepless, reaching kind. Instead, it felt more like the aftermath of an illness, depleted, clear, the way you feel after a fever finally breaks, and you can breathe again and everything looks slightly sharper than it did before. She thought about the baby constantly. She'd started talking to him. She knew it sounded strange, or would have sounded strange to her before, but she did it. Narrated her days to him in a low voice, while she worked, while she walked the neighborhood in the evenings with her mother, while she lay in bed at night listening to the old house settle. "We're having soup for dinner. Your grandfather burned the bread again. It's cold, but the leaves are nice." Her cousin Antoine called from Atlanta. He was the cousin she was closest to, funny and direct in a way that had always made her feel less alone, and he called every few days that month, not to say much, just to be on the line. Once he stayed on the phone for 2 hours while they both worked. Neither of them spoke for most of it. It was enough. She was 37 weeks when she met Hollis. She had gone to a prenatal class at the community center. Her midwife had recommended it, and Anise, who was doing this alone now, had decided to stop declining things she'd been offered. She arrived a few minutes late and took the one open chair and found herself next to a man who looked slightly more lost than she felt, which made her immediately feel better. He introduced himself quietly. Hollis. He said his sister was supposed to be here with him, but she'd had a work thing and he hadn't wanted to cancel because, and here he looked briefly embarrassed, he was 39 and was going to be a father in 3 weeks and genuinely did not know what he was doing. Anise said, 3 weeks? I'm at 37. He said, do you know what you're doing? She said, almost nothing. He smiled. It was a calm kind of smile, unhurried, the kind worn by someone who has decided to find things interesting rather than alarming. She noticed it in the way you notice something you'll remember later. They sat through the class and talked a little afterward in the parking lot, about due dates, about the particular loneliness of 3rd trimester, about a mutual inability to assemble furniture. He had tried to build a changing table and given up. She told him about her father and the crib, and he laughed, genuinely, and she liked the sound of it. He asked if she wanted to get coffee sometime. Just coffee, he said, quickly, like he wanted to be clear about what he was and wasn't asking. She gave him her number. They texted for the next week and a half in that careful way that happens when 2 people are being honest about how fragile things are. He didn't push. She didn't pull back. They talked about their jobs. He ran a small general contracting company, had built it from nothing over a decade, was proud of it in the same quiet way she was proud of her title, and about their families and about what they were afraid of, which turned out to be different versions of the same thing, messing it up, loving something so much and still finding a way to ruin it. She told him about Tobias. She didn't plan to, but he asked how she'd ended up at that class alone, and she told him, and he listened in the way that some people listen, without flinching, without over-responding, without turning it immediately into something about his own experiences. When she was done, he said, "I'm sorry that happened to you." She said, "I'm not sorry anymore. I was for a while." "When did it stop?" She thought about it. "About a week after I filed. I just stopped." He nodded like he understood. Maybe he did. She went into labor on a Wednesday morning, 2 days before her due date. Her water broke at 4 a.m., and she lay there for 10 minutes just breathing before she called her mother. Her mother arrived in 17 minutes. Her father followed, wearing his coat over his pajamas, holding a thermos of coffee he'd apparently had the presence of mind to make, which was so like him that Anise laughed through a contraction. Labor was long, 14 hours. Her mother held her hand through most of it, and her father sat in the waiting room and reportedly drove the nurses mildly crazy with questions, which the midwife told her about afterward with a barely concealed smile. Her son was born at 6:18 in the evening. He weighed 7 pounds and 4 ounces. He had a lot of black hair and a very serious expression, and he smelled like something she had no word for. The closest thing was home, though she knew that wasn't quite right. He was the thing that made that word possible. She named him Eli. She cried when they put him on her chest. Not the way she'd expected, not dramatically, not in a way she was performing even for herself, just quietly, steadily, the way you cry when something true has happened and your body has to acknowledge it somehow. Her mother was crying too. Her father in the doorway turned briefly to face the wall, which was how she knew he was crying. She held Eli and thought, "Here we are, we made it." Hollis sent a text that evening. He had heard from her. She'd sent a short message during the brief window when she had her phone in a free hand, and he replied, "Congratulations, Anise. He's lucky to have you." She read it twice and set the phone face down and looked at her son. Tobias signed the divorce papers 3 weeks after Eli was born. Constance handled all of it. Anise didn't have to be in the same room with him once. She had expected to feel more, watching those documents finalize on her screen. Instead, she felt something closer to the click of a lock, a small definitive sound. She moved into her own place when Eli was 6 weeks old, a 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood she'd always liked, with windows that faced east and got the morning light. Her parents helped her move. Antoine drove up from Atlanta for the weekend and assembled an entire living room in one afternoon, talking the entire time, making her mother laugh. Life looked different now. Harder in some ways, but the hardness had texture. It was the hardness of things that were real that mattered. She was up at 3 a.m., most nights, rocking Eli in the half-dark, and sometimes it was exhausting in a way she couldn't describe, and sometimes it was the most alive she'd ever felt, and often both were true at the same time. She went back to work at 12 weeks. Her first day back, Rachel stopped by her office doorway and looked at her and said, "You look good." Not the "you look good" of politeness, the kind that meant something. Hollis and she had kept texting. He'd had his son, Oliver, he told her, born healthy, 8 pounds 1 ounce, and she'd sent him a message that just said "you did it," and he'd replied "we both did," and they'd left it there for a while. They had dinner for the first time when the boys were 2 months old. A Saturday evening, her parents watching Eli, a quiet restaurant he'd chosen because it was close and easy, and he said he'd learned to stop making things complicated. She arrived in a dress she'd forgotten she owned. He stood up when she walked in. They talked for 3 hours. The conversation moved in the easy, unhurried way of people who already know each other a little and are not in a hurry to pretend otherwise. He talked about his work, about Oliver, about the particular experience of going to the grocery store at 6 a.m., because that was now the only time the baby slept. She told him about Eli's face when he encountered a ceiling fan for the first time, pure astonishment, like someone had shown him the sky. They walked out together into the October evening and he said, "Can I see you again?" And she said yes. She said yes without performing hesitation, without the calculation she might have done before, the measuring of risk, the managing of expectations, the shrinking. She just said yes because she wanted to, and that was enough. It was not easy, not all of it. They moved slowly, deliberately, the way you move, when you've both learned what it costs to hurry. There were evenings when she was too tired for anything, and he showed up anyway with food, and sat on her couch and let her not talk, and that was what she needed. There were moments when old fear surfaced, when she caught herself watching him for evidence of something, checking for what was hidden, and he was patient with those moments without making her feel ashamed of them. He met Eli at 4 months. They sat on her living room floor with the baby between them, and Eli grabbed Hollis's finger and held on with the grip that still surprised her, that disproportionate grip, and she watched Hollis's face go completely soft in a way she recognized. The same look she must have had in that exam room, looking at the monitor, seeing the small curved shape with the flickering heart. She understood something then. Not that everything was going to be fine. She had learned to be suspicious of that kind of certainty, but that this, right here, was real. The floor, the light, her son's hand around a good man's finger. That was enough. She was learning how most of the best things started, not with certainty but with a small hand holding on.